Okay, so you have your the backup of your website at the ready. You have installed W3 Total Cache and you've configured page caching for your website. And hopefully you've used at the very least webpagetest.org to test what the implementation of page caching has actually done for the performance of your website. And if you did, you'll have noticed, if your site was entirely unoptimized prior, you'll notice a very big difference in those performance metrics that we talked about in those tools. So now that we've done that, what we want to do is move on to browser caching within W3 Total Cache. So just as it was with page caching, we want to go down to the Performance tab that now appears in your WordPress admin sidebar and go to General Settings. You can either click on Browser Cache or scroll down to it. You'll enable that here. After doing so, again, the first thing you may want to do is enable preview mode. And if you elect to use that feature, then come down here and save all of your settings. And once you've done that, we'll go into, again, just as it is with page cache, we particularize our browser cache settings over here. All right, and there's several sections here, just as there was with page cache. We've got a general, browser caching for CSS and JavaScript resources, browser cache for HTML and XML, and then media and other. So this general section, whatever you tick off in here, will automatically populate the other fields, or the corresponding fields in these other particularized sections. So, for example, if you elect to set the last modified header, you see how it's not ticked here, but were we to tick it, it is then ticked in all of the other, in the particularization of each resource type. We're not going to be using last modified header. Well, you can, but I'm going to recommend specific settings for you here, specific general settings. Again, these are global policies, where we specify those. And then according to each type, should you want to change your headers, you would do that within the context of each individual type. For example, if you globally set, again, the last modified header, but did not want to set a last modified header for CSS and JavaScript, you would untick last modified header here, and it would only be, and you would only not have a last modified header for CSS and JavaScript resources. So let's get to configuring this. In the general, you only need one of last modified header or E tag. Now we're using an E tag. I would recommend you do the same. You don't need to do both last modified and E tag. It's redundant for the browser. It doesn't need both. It's not going to harm you if you have both, but it's redundant. And you only need one of expires or the cache control header. Now we have it configured such that we're using the set expires header. I would recommend that you use that as well. Again, you only need one of last modified or E tag and one of set expires or cache control. The W3 total cache header. Do not set this. This actually is unfortunately a security vector that hackers with programs that can exploit certain things within the context of your headers and source code. This sets a header that allows their programs or the hacker themselves to exploit certain things in your website. So anyway, the long and short of it is that you do not want to check the W3 total cache header. Now remember gzip compression. This is where we enable that. This would be applied globally here. Again, in the general settings are applied globally. So by enabling gzip compression here, we are enabling gzip compression for CSS and JavaScript, HTML and XML, and media and other. And we want to go ahead and do that. You're unlikely to have, again, if you have a proper host and you're using a well-coded, a theme coded for performance and plugins that are coded for performance, you're not likely to have any problems whatsoever by globally enabling gzip compression. I'll talk about some troubleshooting with respect to that here in a moment. So we have our global settings here. We've set our expires headers. Oops, let me go back up here. Again, we've globally applied things, and they are now applied to each individual sort of resource. Our expires header lifetime for CSS and JavaScript, those very rarely change. So you want to set a long expires time for them. This represents a full year here. Now if you're mathematically challenged, as it were, there's several online converters for seconds into years and seconds into months and seconds into days. You just Google that and you'll get your number and you can plug it in here. You're going to want to go for a full year for CSS and JavaScript, more than likely. Unless you change those constantly, then you want to adjust as you need to adjust them. Now our cache control policy here. So unless you're making use of the set cache control header, you don't have to worry about the cache control policy. If you do opt for the cache control header, you really don't have to. It's just really complicating things for you. But if you should want to do that, go ahead and set this for cache. You've got a drop-down menu here with some choices. Go ahead and check for cache with max age. Public max age equals expires in seconds. And you can see that HTTP gzip compression is enabled because we've enabled it globally. Now, some troubleshooting. If after implementing this, you notice that you're having problems with your CSS and JavaScript, you can try disabling gzip compression for those resource types. Again, if you're on a proper host and you're using a coded for performance theme and good plugins, you're not likely to have any problems, especially if you're on a proper host. Whenever possible, you want to use gzip compression. And again, if you end up having problems with gzip compression, if whatever problem you find that you're having with your JavaScript and cascading style sheets is remedied by way of turning off gzip compression, that's another really good sign that the home where you've built your website is improper relative to what it needs. So onto HTML and XML. So again, we've globally applied certain things. You're going to definitely want a different expires header lifetime here. And this number here, you can see, is an hour. And you want that number to match what we've done here in page cache for garbage collection removal. You want those numbers to match up for reasons that will become, it should be pretty clear already, but will be clarified even more later once we get to advanced optimizations and beyond. So back to browser cache. HTML and XML, set for 1 hour. So what that means, what that indicates rather, is that when browser, somebody lands on your website, and whatever browser they're using, the browser is being instructed here that to refresh whatever is in the browser cache every hour upon the hour, or should the user of your website come to your website, leave, and then come back within an hour, it will serve them the same HTML and XML. If, however, they come back after 61 minutes, let's say, they will get the browser will re-request the HTML and XML to make sure that the user is getting the freshest version of the page, or the freshest version of whatever asset or resource is required to render the page that they have navigated back to. And given that we set etag globally, this is set as well. And again, gzip compression. If you get a lot of odd character, let's do some troubleshooting. If you get odd character encoding after enabling gzip compression, odd character encoding being if you see funky symbols and whatnot, or if you get an internal server error, or if you your pages just don't look right. Again, you can try to disable gzip compression for HTML and XML. Ideally, you don't want to do that because gzip compression is a big deal when optimizing your WordPress website. Again, if you're on a good host, you're not going to have any problems. The troubleshooting will not be necessary. Media and other files, so your images and videos and things of that nature, uploads. Again, we've got a global policy set here for expires headers. Expires lifetimes. How often do you change your images and alter your images or your videos and whatnot? Not very often. So again, you want a long lifetime for those. You want to instruct the browser to keep that within cache for a very long time. That way it doesn't have to re-request the resource, and the end user gets a much faster user experience. So set that to full year. Again, those converters, for those who are like me, mathematically challenged, Google converters, hours to seconds, seconds to years, years to seconds, etc. etag is set, and gzip compression is enabled. Here with media and other files, we have an additional option for disabling cookies for static files. Well, we've got it for up here too. Sorry, I needed to go over that. So let's rewind a tad. Back to CSS and JavaScript. Disabling cookies for static files removes set cookie header, the set cookie header for responses. You want to tick that. Here's the thing. When we get into one of the last sections in the course on content delivery networks and optimizing the edge, we'll go over exactly what all that means later. You're going to be getting a cookie anyway, a security cookie. However, disabling cookies sent from the server is still advantageous for you, and will improve your grades on all of those testing tools that we've already gone over. So go ahead and tick that for, it's globally applied here, I believe. Yeah, don't set cookies for static responses. So that is therefore deployed for all of the individual types. So back to media. Again, you want a long expires time there. Now for media, you can additionally, in addition to the other image optimization we're going to be doing, you can go ahead and tick gzip compression, although it's not going to make a huge difference, but in the end, in the aggregate, every little bit helps. It's not a very efficient way. Gzip compression is not a very efficient way to deal with things such as images, and is really primarily for text-based files. However, some of your other may be text-based. So you're not doing anything wrong here by enabling gzip compression, even though it's going to be applied to media as well as those other files that may be text-based. So you can go ahead and enable that there. And that is browser caching. Again, just to recap, you're not going to have any problems if you're on a proper host using a well-coded theme and using well-coded plugins. And when I say a well-coded theme and when I say well-coded plugins, what I'm specifically referencing is whether or not they either come to you optimized, in other words, the files, the JavaScript and CSS files as far as plugins go, and as well as theme files, come to you already minified, unlikely to be concatenated, or concatenated to the extent to which they can be, which we'll deal with later. But at the very least minified, or files that can be minified. Sometimes, and we'll get into this in the troubleshooting section of minification, and also in the render blocking CSS and JavaScript conundrum. If a file cannot have optimizations applied to it or does not come to you relatively optimized, it is not coded for performance. So that is what I'm specifically referencing, and we'll deal with those sorts of issues later. But for now, you now know how to implement browser caching and a proper configuration for browser caching in your WordPress website. Congratulations.